Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Expert Insights webinars. I'm your host, Don McLean, and today's session is focused on evolving your FSP relationships to achieve the maximum return, presented by MMS. As an innovative data-focused CRO, MMS brings insights from our global team of highly respected data and regulatory experts across 4 continents. Here to present today is Danelle Leducer, Director of Functional Service Solutions, Liz Valley-Burr, Manager of Project and Account Management, as well as Alan Nicole, Senior Director of European and South African Operations. As a reminder, your microphones will be muted for this session, and we'll send out a recording following the webinar. If you have any questions, please ask them at any time in the Q&A icon at the top right of your screen, and we'll answer them at the conclusion of today's session. With that, I'll turn it over to Danelle Leducer. Danelle.
Thanks, Don. And thank you for taking the time out of your day, everyone, to join us for this topic. So I'm going to be taking us through first the dynamic nature of the pharmaceutical and drug development world and how outsourced providers are a critical component in meeting those challenges, particularly through the agility of the FSP model. Filling the skill set gap, evolving technology and data sources are creating talent gaps and challenges. So I'll present a solution that we've been working on internally to meet those needs, as well as efficiencies that can be realized when using the same provider across multiple functions. Liz is then going to take us through a real-world example of how a strategic FSP relationship evolved over time along with the sponsor's needs. And then finally, Alan will talk about how to meet the challenges that the IR35 regulations present. So there's a saying that the only constant is change, and this is certainly true in the pharmaceutical and biotech world. There are massive changes within the industry that affect entire organizations. So obvious examples of these macro level changes are mergers and acquisitions, which are very popular in the headlines. But large, high-profile drug programs can also have organization-level impacts. And we've certainly witnessed that this past year with the race to develop COVID treatments and vaccines. Each of the COVID efforts impacted multiple other programs within each of those sponsor organizations. So for instance, resources, both people and budget were shifted to support the program, and this resulted in other therapeutic area programs being delayed, canceled, or put on hold. And oftentimes, this was more than just a shift of resources that was needed. More manpower was required and in very short order to meet extremely expedited timelines. So how did those sponsor organizations meet these needs? Well, largely through their outsourcing partners. Vendor partners, either existing or new, were tapped to quickly scale up to meet those needs. These were large, coordinated, and interdependent efforts for both organizations to shift, scale, and adapt. Now, whether the COVID campaigns were successful or some unfortunately were dropped for not meeting safety or efficacy targets, all of them, regardless of success or failure, had further ripple effects throughout the companies themselves, and therefore also their vendor partners. Continued increased levels of resourcing are required to support further development of the COVID therapies, as well as go back and re-engage those other therapeutic area programs that were delayed or put on hold in favor of focusing efforts on the urgency of the COVID programs. So those companies who ended up having to abandon their COVID efforts likely found themselves over-resourced. As we know, internal headcount is usually retained first. So the burden of any excess becomes a reduction in team size for the vendor partners. But this is where the FSP relationship shines. These are exactly the scenarios that FSP partnerships are meant to be able to address. It's a scalable model. And we'll see an excellent example of the ability to scale and adapt over time in the real world example that Liz is going to be sharing with us a little bit later. but no additional burden of HR processes. We all know that recruiting, qualifying, hiring is time consuming, it's a challenge, and this time and effort falls to the FSP partner. The ability to augment the talent of the team. In this model, FSP team members are usually quite integrated with the study team. Oftentimes they are or become subject matter experts for the sponsor deliverables and processes, as well as industry regulations and guidelines, and therefore they end up being able to assume leadership roles within sponsor teams. And finally, FSP partnerships bring an extra level of governance and executive level commitment that really results in shared accountability. The FSP partner relationship is a priority. This slide summarizes some of the advantages of the FSP model, specifically in the categories of flexibility and a true partnership. So in addition to scale, which we already talked about, FSPs also offer flexibility in these areas: pricing models, governance, geography. And then the true partnership component brings many advantages. We've already touched on the commitment to do whatever it takes to scale. And the remainder of topics in this webinar are going to reflect the other advantages and benefits of an FSP partnership. Today's challenge: innovation means innovative roles. As technology and data sources continue to evolve, so do the requests for talent. Shown here, I'm not going to read these, but shown here are a few quotes from industry executives. The new technologies combined with new data sources and desires and needs for more and more real-time and visual analytics, including animation and interactive dashboards, make it nearly impossible to find talent that checks all of the boxes on the new job description wish lists. So everyone is struggling to fill these roles, both sponsor organizations and CROs. So just as some examples, I want to show some examples of what we've seen recently in industry job descriptions. I'm going to start with the stats description. In addition to the items that I'm going to show, usually requires 5 to 10 years of experience. And they say 5, but they really mean 10, as those candidates with 5 years generally get rejected. So trial statistician, okay, that's a usual request. But also we'd like them to have experience doing exploratory work, preferably with machine learning and our Shiny, and additionally medical affairs and publication support. I mean, while you're at it, throw in health economics and outcomes research experience. So previously that was 2 to 3 individuals, and we're seeing all of these wrapped up into a request for one person to fill all these needs. So the data scientist requirements, as you can imagine, are much more varied and extensive. I'm not going to read these, but I'll click through so you get the idea. Lots of advanced analytics, visual tools, animation, which we can find in other industries, but in addition, have all of that plus clinical trial data experience. So as the real world evidence and data analytics leader was quoted as saying in the previous slide, sometimes it feels like you're looking for the proverbial unicorn. So how do we meet these talent gaps? Well, some of the larger sponsors have committed time, a lot of time and resources to creating innovative programs to develop this talent internally. But what if you're a smaller organization without the budget to do so? Or if the internal program at your company is too broad and isn't specific enough to meet your talent gap needs? Well, at MMS, we have a program called Built to Suit. So we're working collaboratively with our sponsor partners to develop talent and fill these gaps. As I said, in partnership with sponsors and also with universities in a variety of different variations of this model. So I'm showing one example here, a very simplified example for sure. And this could potentially be a candidate from another industry who already possesses some or all of the higher level skills required, but perhaps lacks pharma experience or clinical data experience. Certainly a university grad or someone on the intern path would look a little bit different. But as you can see, and as you can imagine, to embark on something like this, it's really beneficial to have a level of trust already in place, as both parties need to have skin in the game to make this successful, which is why an FSP relationship is valuable for this type of shared venture. So starting over here on the left, the desired skilled list, this would be through discussions with the sponsor. This is going to be very customized and individual to that specific need, as well as what we're seeing in the industry. The next step, once we have that list, is that MMS identifies the candidates, assesses their skills, and hires them. The next step shown here, deploy to client, would be that they would be able to start working immediately with the sponsor team, but this is certainly situation dependent, may or may not be possible right away. The level of the candidate and requirements of the work will determine whether or not there are contributions the candidate can make immediately. If there are, they can start project work right away while concurrent training happens. If not, there could be a period of initial training until the candidate can start supporting sponsor project work. So this train the gaps, this is targeted training to address any skill gaps in addition to the standard training and would be custom to the situation. Initial support of sponsor project work is under the supervision of an MMS mentor who also provides management oversight. The level of that would be determined on the strength and experience of the candidate. And then of course, eventually the goal is the candidate transitions to full and independent member of the team. So all of these steps are moved through collaboratively with discussion and assessment and input between both MMS and our sponsor partners. So the benefits of a program like this, there is time and investment on both sides to go into this, but we feel that the benefits greatly, outweigh that initial investment. The sponsor acquires that hard to find talent without the burden of hiring, training, and mentoring. They get the opportunity to lead and develop the talent versus poaching from somewhere else. And there's benefit for the talent too, for the candidate. They get training and experience to really explore whether or not this is a career path that interests them, which, over the long haul contributes to greater job satisfaction, empowers them, and they're more engaged. And finally, both MMS and our sponsors develop expertise, in the skills that are needed moving forward with the innovation that's happening in the industry. So far, we've covered evolving your FSP partnerships for maximum return through the ability to scale, both up and down, and also to find innovative and creative ways to develop talent to meet ever expanding and evolving needs. So I do want to cover one more way to maximize return in your FSP partnerships before handing off to Liz. So most FSPs have expertise in multiple core competencies, and efficiencies can be realized when sponsors utilize one partner across more than one function, particularly when they're interdependent and have handoffs to each other. So this often does not happen and can be, truly a missed opportunity for sponsors. For starters, these elements are already in place, and coming into a new functional area of service with these last three already in place is a huge advantage, which impacts their speed to be able to productively contribute to projects and also bypasses those initial challenges that arise when getting to know each other, navigating systems and access issues, which always happen. So these efficiencies that we're going to cover in the next couple slides result in reduced cycle time. So reduced cycle time is an indirect savings, but it is significant because it really does speed drugs to market. So we're going to go through some different types of cross-functional FSP engagements and some logical examples here in these top two bullets where efficiencies can be realized by using the same FSP partner for these functions. Some of the advantages that we've experienced when working across MMS functional lines starts with communication. It's the ease of communication on a couple of different levels. Internal colleagues are more accessible and can be more responsive. And communication can be direct and informal. For example, an IM, a phone call, or hopefully at some point we'll go back to in-person discussions. And this is very helpful when there are questions about the data, statistical analysis, or how to interpret statistical results. It's time efficient. Any time delays in query or response time are removed or reduced. When there are errors, for instance, say the medical writer identifies an error, this can be communicated and resolved more quickly when the functional lines are within MMS. Around deadlines, we're also better able to collaborate to achieve deadlines. For example, if there are delays or extra time is needed by one of the MMS functional lines, we can negotiate internally and make this seamless without affecting the overall timeline. Additionally, if like unexpected time off arises, it can be mitigated within the MMS team. And tools and templates really lend themselves to this model. And of course, the value of these increases the broader the application across functional lines and document types. So the expansion and efficiencies to be gained across functions does not need to be as broad as the multi-function examples in the previous slide in order to reap efficiencies. So in this slide, there's an example of the benefits seen just with the utilization of medical writing and the handoff to publishing or RegOps. There's efficiencies in handoff with the medical writer providing RegOps source documents so that they can publish on a rolling basis. Since the medical writer is receiving source docs and uploading to the document management system, long before the sponsor would normally involve RegOps in the process, RegOps can then publish in advance and reduce publishing times, enhancing quality and resource planning. Also, when RegOps colleagues have access to medical writing documents, they can research the answers to their own questions without involving the medical writer. And this is not necessarily the case when you're working across vendors because they may not have access to the systems. So it's also more efficient for RegOps to interact with MMS medical writers on questions about things like external link targets, missing documents, than it would be for them to reach out to client teams, determine the correct POC, and schedule time to discuss. Also, in terms of being proactive, further upstream medical writing is able to ask RegOps questions throughout the writing process to determine things like linking strategies and what source documents need to be provided so they can be proactive about incorporating those and prevent eventual issues with publishing. So not shown here, but there are also efficiencies within a functional area that seem obvious but aren't always taken advantage of. Within medical writing, of course, there's a progression from protocols and ICFs to CSRs and submissions. So often FSPs can be contracted for protocols, but not the ICFs. And those documents go hand in hand in development, certainly impact each other, and efficiencies can be gained if you keep that within one vendor, especially as you start to get into amendments. And of course, additional efficiencies can be realized extending to support to include CSRs and submissions. This is where tech-enabled templates and tools would come into play as well. So this concludes my portion of the webinar. Thank you for your time and attention to exploring these opportunities to maximize return on your FSP partnerships. I'm going to hand it over to Liz for a real-world example of these.
Great, thanks so much, Janelle. All right, so I will be going over a case study of an FSP partnership we currently have in place. I'll walk you through this partnership, which starting in 2012 in the area of medical writing, and discuss the growth and expansion over time. So throughout this case study, I will continue to revisit a few of the topics Donnell has already discussed, including flexibility, scalability, the importance of true partnership, and efficiencies. So this graph will build as I walk through this example, and at the end you'll be able to see the full visual of this growth over time. So we can start in 2012 and push the first to go to 2013. This partnership started small, supporting one document type in medical writing, and we saw a steady growth over the first couple of years. So when you move to 2014, that steady increase. During this time, we focused on developing a scalable infrastructure, including identifying the roles needed and the right talent to fulfill these roles. As I continue to go through this case study, you will see the opportunity for leadership roles increase. But for now, I just want to pause right here and talk through a couple of the roles that we identified early on that are still in place today, and then also just touch on some of the important traits and characteristics of the leaders that are within these roles. So the two roles that I'll be touching on are resource management. This resource works closely with the sponsor team to have a pulse on upcoming needs so we can grow and identify the right talent to match those upcoming needs. They are also responsible for the day-to-day resourcing. The next role, the SME for the deliverable type, has a close pulse on the ongoing projects and works with the resourcing manager for upcoming projects, acts as an internal point of contact of escalation, guides internal trainings, and troubleshoots with the sponsor. I know Donnell mentioned this, but these two roles help take the HR burden and the training burden off of the sponsor, and also help define a clear escalation path between the sponsor and MMS. When we think about the SME for the deliverable type, it's obvious that this person needs to be technically sound and needs to be able to advise on the specific document type. But in order for this role to be truly successful, there's a few other characteristics and traits that we see our leaders having that play this role. One being vision, the ability to see big picture and think strategically. Inspiration, flexibility, patience, and having an open mind with a focus on continuous improvement. Having the right resources in the right role allow us to swiftly pivot and onboard the right talent. So now moving into 2015, now that I have touched on at a high level the infrastructure and the roles that we had in place, you can see 2015 had a lot of changes. We introduced a new service as a result of a new policy. In this case, this was policy 70. We had an expansion of our current medical writing services into a new document type. And then based on the expanded work and the addition of new services, we added a low-cost region to support our teams in the sponsor and bring cost efficiencies. How were we able to adapt and be successful with all of these changes? So we mirrored our strong infrastructure and increased the number of leadership roles to support the new work streams. We also capitalized on our true and strong partnership with the sponsor that we've developed over the last couple of years. I think a good example of this is how we work together as a partner through Policy 70. This was first in industry, and we were able to build a process together, learn together, revise our processes, and develop a team. Over the next few years, things were fairly stable. If we go to 2018, you can see that things were fairly stable over the last over those few years. In 2019, we saw another policy introduced that closely matched Policy 70. At this time, Policy 70 was on hold, but Health Canada came out with a new policy at that time. And we were able to rally our troops and step right in where we left off. As we already had the infrastructure in place, a team developed and trained, and we understood the sponsors' processes. And we also were members of creating those processes, so we had a very good handle on those. And 2019, we also expanded our medical writing services into another area, and we were able to grow our leadership roles within our group to support that newly added service. So moving to 2020, the year of change. I think that in this year, we were really able to show quite a bit of flexibility. And Danielle, if you just advance one more, you can see we have a little bit of spike there. So we took on 2 rescue projects due to COVID. One, a short-term project, which explains that spike, and one project that turned into a long-term project. Both of these projects were outside of the current areas where we supported in the sponsor. So they were outside of medical writing and transparency, and were in safety and regulatory operations. But we were able to, in order to be successful on taking on these rescue projects at a very challenging time, we were able to capitalize on our strong partnership and experience over the last 8 years and identify a team to match our current infrastructure. And we're able to scale up very quickly to meet the urgent needs. And both projects were successful. With a strong partnership and understanding the sponsor's needs and goals, it really puts us in a good position to be able to introduce efficiencies. We've introduced efficiencies throughout our partnership in many different areas, but I wanted to highlight a couple in 2020. We introduced technology to help support and add efficiencies in the current areas that we support for this sponsor. And then due to the long-term rescue project, we are now supporting publishing of the documents that we author. And I know that Donnell went into more detail on some of the efficiencies that you can see there. And those are efficiencies that we're realizing today. Also, a change in technology within 2020 as the sponsor introduced a new RIM system, and we were able to adapt and add new focused roles or leadership to get us through that change. So in summary, as you can see, this partnership started small, but I think it's a great example of the growth and the benefits that can happen when you have vision, are able to adapt to new opportunities and industry changes. You have the right talent and roles identified and in place, and have an established, strong, and transparent partnership. I hope this case study truly represents what makes an FSP valuable to many sponsors. And as I was going through this, and I was going through my presentation, I often I said partnership many times. And I know it's industry standard for FSP to mean functional service provider, but I think it really should be relabeled to be functional service partnership, as the partnership is the foundation to success. So thank you, and I hope that this showed a clear example and helped really put some of the topics that Donnell presented into a real world example. I'll now be handing it over to Alan to talk to IR35.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz, and thank you, Donnell. It's been very interesting so far. Well, now that we're coming towards the end of our webinar, no FSP discussion is complete at the moment without mentioning IR35 and touching on it. So really, IR35, what is it? Well, it is HMRC's press release 35, which is called Countering Avoidance in the Provision of Personal Services. The interesting bit there is the date, 1999. So this is not a new legislation. It is a tweak to current legislation, which has been in place and has been well known since 99. It is regional in that it affects all UK-based contractors or freelancers, and the key primary focus is disguised employment. Now, the revisions from which were originally launching in 2020, which have been pushed back a little bit to now, the main scope of them are talking about the fact that it is now the organisation's responsibility to determine where the tax liability falls. And the main one is that the liability applies across the entire supply chain, so HMRC can hunt for the liability. Now, what is this liability that people talk about? Well, if a contractor is deemed to be working within the scope of IR35, they will be liable to pay income tax and national insurance contributions as if they were an employee. The employer, whether that's an FSP provider or a sponsor client or a staffing agency, then also becomes liable for the equivalent NICs and tax contributions. These two amounts form the liability that HMRC can hunt for up and down the supply chain. So from the contractor, the staffing agency, the FSP provider, or the sponsor client. It doesn't matter where any of these are located regionally, as long as the contractor is within the UK. But the net result here is that the cost of using a contractor increases significantly if they are deemed to be working within the scope of IR35. So it's fairly important to ensure compliance with IR35 legislations. Now, this can be done in a number of ways, but the main way from the beginning is to establish and document that there is a firm business need to use a contractor. You need to review and modify the contractor working practices where necessary, and there are a number of key focus areas to look at. The main ones here are supervision, direction and control of the contractor, substitution and what they call mutuality of obligation, and then the third one being onboarding, training and continuing professional development. Now, provided all of these aspects are considered and the working practices are sound and robust, contractor engagement is still a commercially viable business model. We need to be aware of all the staffing models that are available, and it's important to be able to select an FSP partner. I should perhaps drop the word partner there, shouldn't I, just say FSP, based on what Liz mentioned earlier, that can satisfy the needs of your business. So they need to be able to be aware of the continuing likelihood that this legislation is going to evolve and what that actually means to the contractors that you still have a need to use. Okay, so that is really providing a quick snapshot of some of the implications and compliance this year of IR35, and I would now like to hand it back to Donnell.
Thank you, Alan. I'm just coming back in to wrap up with the key takeaways, the things that we hope that you got out of this presentation, and around maximizing FSP partnership through scalability to support evolving and rescue needs, innovative solutions such as the build to suit model to meet these technology changes and talent gaps that are continuing and will continue to evolve. Cross-functional efficiencies that can result in reduced cycle time, capitalizing on established trust relationship to evolve together, as Liz nicely gave us a visual for. And in regards to IR35 solutions, at MMS, we'll continue to monitor the enforcement and evolution of IR35 to ensure our clients are not exposed to any risks. And that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. Don?
Thank you, Donnell, and thank you, Alan and Liz, for this presentation. Absolutely wonderful. We would like to move on to the Q&A portion of this webinar. I do have a question here to kick us off. This is for you, Donnell. You mentioned the Build the Suit program was a shared venture between you and sponsors. What does the sponsors' commitment look like in that model?
Thanks, Don. So that's a good question, and the high-level answer is that it really varies depending on the requirements and the candidate's starting point. I think, as I mentioned, the graphic I showed in the presentation was really a very high-level simplified view. In practice, there are multiple defined steps and assessments that would be put in place for the candidate's progression through the model, and those would be customized for the skill set need and the candidate's starting point. So that customization would include targeted training, duration, level of oversight, assessment gates, and there is a bill rate progression that reflects the progressing capabilities of the candidate. So I guess directly to your question, in all scenarios, sponsors would pay the progressive bill rate as the candidate progresses through and increases their ability to contribute. And additionally, depending on the arrangement, there may be a minimum number of candidates or a time commitment for retaining them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Danelle. We have one more question right now. If there are any additional, again, to submit them. All right. This one is for Liz. Liz, within the case study, you mentioned having a pulse on upcoming activities. Can you speak to the importance of transparency within the partnership and how that impacts resourcing?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Don. Well, first of all, I think having a transparent partnership is one of the most important things for success. And really being transparent on things that can impact resourcing or even changes within the team, such as tool and system changes. And as I know, I spoke to a couple of tool changes in my presentation, reorganization, product development plans, and really having meaningful forecasting allow us to plan effectively for resourcing and make the appropriate resourcing changes. And I think within this particular partnership, we have a very close partnership where we do have a good pulse on the changes that could impact our team and thoughtful planning on how those may impact our team and impact assessment on those. So it's important to really treat the vendor or your extension of your team, MMS, as an extension of your team, and have these discussions early on and be very transparent.
Thanks, Liz. Danelle, we have a third question. This one's for you. Why do sponsors not always go with an FSP? And there's a comment that it seems to be the most rational way if you have a pipeline.
So the question was, why do they not always go with an FSP?
That's correct.
Well, I don't have insight into decision making within the organizations. I do know a lot of things are driven by, a lot of those decisions, outsourcing decisions, can be driven by procurement, or perhaps there are organizations that have just been legacy, and so there's a hesitancy to switch. I think there are a lot of advantages to the FSP partner in terms of if you have a pipeline of work where you're going to need consistent support, and for all of the reasons that we just showed, right? The ability to be flexible, to work with you, to customize solutions. There are some situations where a full service does make more sense. Generally I would think more so on the clinical trial management piece, which is not something we do. We're a data-focused organization. So I think there are a lot of historic legacy reasons that companies may be hesitant to switch to an FSP model. There is a lot more upfront work because it is a relationship. So there's more effort that goes into ensuring that partnership, because it is designed to be a long-term strategic partnership. So you do need to be certain upfront, and there's more work that goes into building that relationship and communication plan. But I think the benefits far outweigh that initial investment.
Okay, well said. We have another question for Liz. Liz, in your case study, you mentioned a 2020 rescue. Was that from another FSP vendor or a regular CRO unable to accommodate for COVID changes?
Yes, that was actually from one of the sponsor's current CROs, unable to, had some downtime during COVID, so we were able to step in and rescue or plug into the immediate need of those projects until that vendor was able to be back up online.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, Danelle. And again, thank you, Alan. That is the conclusion of our session. If you have any additional questions on what you heard today, please follow up with your point of contact directly or email media@mmsholdings.com and we'll direct you to a presenter. For additional free webinars, visit mmsholdings.com/webinars or follow us on LinkedIn for updates. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy your day.